Hi, Steve. Just double checking you can hear us again.
Yeah, I can hear you fine, thanks.
That's great, thank you. And Anne, just double checking you can hear us okay?
Yes, I can, thank you.
That's great, thank you. Hi, Hannah. Just double checking you can hear us okay?
Yeah, sorry, Teams restart, but I'm here now, thanks.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to this board meeting. My name's Eleanor McIntosh and I'm Deputy Convener of the Park Board. And I'm sitting in for Sandy Bremner, who we all know is off sick at the minute, but making good progress, so we wish him all the best. I also have apologies from Jiva Blackett and Mike. Derek has managed to get in.
Thank you.
Are you hearing us, Derek?
Yes, I am. Sorry about that.
No,
Apologies,
that's okay.
Chair.
That's fine. Okay, so we've covered apologies and matters arising not covered elsewhere. I don't think there is anything. So any declarations of interest for today's agenda? Don't think there should be. Okay. So we've got one item today. It's the local development plan, and we're being asked to approve the evidence report for submission to Scottish ministers for its gate check review. Dan Harris is going to take us through it in a wee minute. Can we just bear in mind that proofreading is ongoing, so we don't want today to be about spelling mistakes and grammatical errors. But if you do notice anything, can you please send it through to Dan by email or give him a phone? But let's not use up today's time picking that all out. Dan, I think I'll just hand over to you.
Thank you very much, convener. And thank you to members for considering this massive collection of documents and annexes that you've been given. I appreciate there is an awful lot of information there for you to digest. So yes, this is the evidence report, and it's essentially the first major stage in the preparation of the next local development plan. It's important to note that this is not a policy document in itself, but is intended to be a summary of the evidence that is needed to prepare the proposed plan. Therefore, it doesn't contain any policy content, and nor does it identify sites for allocation. These decisions of the proposed plan stage, which is the next stage after the evidence report has gone through its gate check. So, as Kavina said, board members are being asked to approve the evidence for that submission, and during for its gate check, during which a reporter will assess the evidence report and its supporting information for its sufficiency. The evidence report has been drafted with this gate check process in mind, because the gate check is a bit like an examination in which the reporter is an examiner who's checking through to ensure that all the legislative requirements and all other guidance requirements have been met. It's broadly structured in line with the policy contents of National Framework 4 in terms of its structure, in terms of its schedules, and the evidence within it reflects the requirements of legislation and guidance. It reflects the engagement that's been undertaken throughout the process, and we've also learned from the outcomes of previous gate checks, which other local authorities' evidence reports have gone through. It contains a wide range of data covering many aspects of the National Park's environment and socio-economic characteristics, but in terms of what will gain the most scrutiny, or will receive the most scrutiny during the gate check, it's the evidence around housing and infrastructure, and in particular transport, education and healthcare infrastructure, as well as the relationship that all those areas have with each other. The evidence report also identifies implications arising from the evidence. So these implications are the things that we will take into account in the development of the proposed plan. So an example of that is the need to identify land to meet an indicative housing land requirement of 889 new homes. And that is the most significant implication that is in here, because it has an effect on almost everything. But most of the implications relate to site assessment process. So they're the usual things that you might consider in any kind of planning decision. You know, it's protected species, protected sites, landscape considerations, flood considerations, and so on and so forth. The evidence report also sets out relationship of the local development plan with the National Planning Framework 4, as well as other guidance that exists. And in particular, it sets out the relationship with the National Parks Partnership Plans, which provides strategic context and direction for the local development plan. This has been strengthened, or will be strengthened, once the Natural Environment Act gains royal assent, which places a duty on public bodies to facilitate the implementation of the partnership plan, rather than just have regard for it. The Park Authority has undertaken a significant amount of engagement preparing the evidence report with a wide range of audiences, including the general public, community councils, local authority departments, and other interested parties. A key part of the gate check's test of sufficiency is this engagement, but particularly engagement with key agencies. And key agencies in this context are organisations like Nature Scott, Scottish Environment Protection Agency, NHS boards, Transport Scotland, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, as well as a few others. Engagement has been undertaken with all these relevant key agencies who have provided information and agreed on with the sufficiency of the evidence report. So this means that the Park Authority is able to submit the evidence report for its gate check with no outstanding disputes with key agencies, which is an important factor because other evidence reports have failed in their test of sufficiency if they have had disputes with those organisations. The requirement for the required statutory assessments have also been undertaken at this stage. So that's Strategic Environmental Assessment Scoping Report, Equality Fairer Scotland Impact Assessment, Strategic Flood Risk Assessment and Place Efficiency Assessment. Habitats Regulations Appraisal and Transport Appraisal will take part as part of the proposed plan. Once submitted, the evidence report will be registered with the DPA, and during this period, the DPA will undertake administrative checks to ensure that all necessary documents and is submitted, and that the evidence report contains key information they require to undertake an assessment of sufficiency. It's worth noting that if there are any fundamental flaws identified by the DPA at this stage, that they will likely recommend that the authority withdraws its evidence report to make amendments and then for it to be resubmitted. That has happened once so far. But officers do not consider that there are any fundamental flaws with our submission, otherwise we would not be presenting it to you today. Once registered with the DPA, a gate check will typically take around 3 months. And that's the target date they'll set. So it takes us into late June, early July in terms of hearing back the outcome of that gate check review. And so if found sufficient, the Park Authority will then progress towards the proposed plan, preparing the proposed plan. However, it's worth noting, and it is set out within the board paper, that there are uncertainties around the gate check because it's a brand new system that we haven't undertaken before, neither have other authorities. So as set out in the committee, in the board paper, to date, the overall success rate for gate checks is only 43%. And if you break that down to first-time submissions, it's only around 35. It's only 35%. So we're submitting within that context, and the evidence report has been drafted with that kind of level of risk at mind, and so we've tried to design it to reduce the chances of it being found insufficient, with particular attention paid to those main areas where insufficiency has been found with the gate checks of other authorities, and that is largely housing, transport and infrastructure, and in particular education and healthcare infrastructure. So officers believe the evidence report is sufficient in its present form, although as set out on the board, we do acknowledge there is a risk. Therefore, alongside being asked to approve the evidence report for its gate check, members are also asked to grant the Head of Planning and Chief Planning Officer delegated powers to respond to any requests for further information and make amendments as a result of the gate checks. And that is to ensure that should insufficiency be found, we're able to turn things around quickly and have as minimum impact on our timescales as possible. Regardless of the outcome, it is well worth saying that officers will undertake work on preparing the proposed plan, and this has already begun, and it will take place while the gate check is underway, with the first major step being the launch for the call for sites and ideas consultation next week, which Dave mentioned earlier. So if members are minded to approve these recommendations today, officers will work on finalising those evidence reports and supporting documents and submit them to Scottish ministers before the end of March. That is my presentation.
Thank you, Dan. You condensed that mountain of paperwork into a very efficient summary there. OK, members, you've had all the documentation. Can I have your thoughts, comments? Pete.
I was just to say, there's an enormous amount of work gone into it. So the areas where I tend to know my policy areas and my evidence-based areas, I had a look at them. They're very comprehensive. I didn't see any gaps. So I commend the level of detail in that and the effort that your team's put in.
Thanks, Pete. Bill.
Dan, the table that shows the minimum all tenure housing land requirement just gives numbers. what are those numbers? You know,
Especially the number of houses.
Okay.
Well, not houses, flats. Number of homes. Sorry, that's essentially the number of homes that need to be provided.
just seems strangely small, to be honest. Existing housing need 52.
So which table are you referring to?
Table 3, extract from the minimum all tenure housing land requirement method paper. It's on page, God knows, no idea.
Right, hang on, I might struggle to find this.
18 of 192.
18 of 192. I don't know what that paper is. What was the annex? What is the annex number as well?
It's the housing.
Annex 1.13.
Annex M, step 13. That means anything.
Table 3, did you say?
Yeah, table 3.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi there. Yeah, so I'm Jeff Parder. I've put this this paper together. This is an extract from the government's calculations of how they got to a housing land figure for us. The existing housing need is based on people who are not yet in suitable housing, effectively homeless. That's their estimate of that across the national park area.
Wow.
Which they've added to a figure which is projected additional housing need coming forward in 10 years. So it's 52 plus 625, which makes this figure of 677, which they then add on a flexibility allowance, a percentage, to get to the 880. That's their figures, and I think most people would say that the government have underestimated existing housing need in their figures. And if you look at the figures for all the councils in all their housing need and demand assessments, their existing housing need is far higher than that.
Even in Highland, I don't know about the rest of the local authorities. The existing housing need in Highland is a multiple of that. So I think the figures are bonkers.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, they set a minimum figure. It's for us to look at all the evidence to consider whether that's a reasonable figure or whether we should be going higher than that. And whilst I would agree with you on that existing housing figure, the overall figures, if you look at the housing demand and need assessments across all the councils, which shows very high affordable housing need, but the overall housing need that they have calculated from the projections is within or below that figure of 850. And that's why we feel a figure of 8889 is a suitable figure for the national park over 10 years. And it's actually a very similar figure that's in the adopted 2021 local development plan. And it's actually, in terms of the amount of houses being built each year, it's a very similar rate, 80 to 100 per year. So what we're proposing is that housing would continue to be built and would grow at a similar rate as it does at the moment.
Phil, are you?
I'm just not convinced.
Okay. Dan, do you want to come back on that at all, or are you quite happy with?
No, I think Jeff gave a very comprehensive answer there.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Russell, then Fiona.
Hey, thank you. And thanks also for the huge amount of work that's in this. As Pete said, there's a fantastic amount of work, so well done to everyone involved. I just had a question about, again, on the housing paper and implications of second homes, empty homes and vacant dwellings. We've got a paragraph here. It says that the proposed plan will not be able to directly control the use of market residential properties as second homes, as planning permission is not required for changes to the use as primary or secondary residences. Second homes also play an important role for the national park's visitor economy. I didn't see anything in the paper that references, and maybe it's just because it's just happened, but Highland Council have just brought in, double, triple council tax on second homes, and we believe that will have an effect on second homes, and should that be referenced in this paper?
Yeah, that absolutely would have an effect, but it wouldn't. It doesn't. It's not an implication for the local development plan itself. So while it is an intervention, it's not a planning intervention. It's not something that would have any impact on the proposed plan. So it could go in, but it would be just as information as opposed to something that had a implication for the proposed plan.
Fiona?
Yeah, well, wow, what a lot of work has been undertaken. Well done, it's fabulous. And as with Pete, I concentrated particularly on the things that are my area of expertise. So I looked very closely at the cultural heritage appendix, and I was really pleased to see that it was particularly up to date in terms of its approach, things like recognising the huge impact that we're going to have with the sale of churches at the moment, and the impact on communities who will want to buy them. So, no, I was really pleased to see that. And I also was pleased to see the consultation with the travellers communities and the response to that in terms of how we can address their desires to have their cultural heritage recognised. So I was really, yeah, it was great. Well done. Thank you.
Hannah?
Thank you. And I'd brilliantly say again, echoing the sheer weight of this paper when I opened it. So again, I kind of looked through areas of my expertise. I just had a bit of a question about the kind of community council engagement. So I'm on page 58 of 75, if you want to follow that. I was looking through that the kind of online engagement with community councils on most topics, including what I would consider very important ones, such as flood risk and water management, economic development, etc. No contributions received, and where there were contributions, it was basically because there's some kind of dispute, right? Is my interpretation of this. And I'm not downplaying the effort that was put into contacting these groups, because I can see the kind of gatherings and the various, things saying organisers attended and were engaged with. So I just guess I have a bit of a question about how effective the community council engagement has been in the local development plan, because quite a lot of this just said attended and engaged with, and it's quite difficult to see what that detail is and whether that's going to be something that's picked up on, that they're just not effectively engaging with this, or maybe that's just my reading of it.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think in terms of the engagement with it's not just community councils, it's the public at large and all sorts of groups. It's very, very hard for them to engage with this kind of content where we're asking specific questions about impacts on local development plan and what is relevant to that. So we have attended community council meetings where community councils have requested us to, and we've had various also email back and forth with various other community councils, even if we haven't been out to them. And what we tended to find, if we'd gone out to speak to them, they've been fairly comfortable in the position that they don't want to specifically respond to the evidence base itself, because unless they have some sort of local information that is of relevance, they're not the experts that can comment on that sort of things, for example. So where we've had actually the best, I think, kind of engagement with community councils and members of the public as well, actually, is through the direct engagement that we've done. So that's been through a range of things. Community action planning meetings, for example, is a big one, where we were able to basically explain the process and also explain how their input and into the community action plan itself would be able to influence the LDP and how we were taking that into account. We've also been to like various other the Cairngorms roadshows that we've done, and again to speak to those individuals directly there. And we've also had the community gathering last year, in which we spoke to a lot of community council people. So the fact that they may not have responded directly to the online engagement on those evidence papers is just one facet of a larger set of engagement with them. And I don't think this is going to be an issue in terms of that kind of response in terms of the gate check itself, because what the reporters will be looking for is that evidence of engagement, which we have set out here, and that is what they're after.
Okay, thank you. John.
After last year's drought, there's an awful lot of areas that the water table has not come back. Can we just be careful where trees are being planted in some of these areas, because the last thing we want to see is lack of water. There's quite a number of estates. I know this side of the hill has been much drier than the Aberdeenshire side. We've really been lucky, but I think we need to watch where we're planting some of these trees.
So the local development plan doesn't obviously direct forestry policy, but in terms of evidence on drought, though, and water scarcity, that is set out within the schedule on flood risk and water management. So that's Schedule 19. So it is recognised as an issue and something that, from a development perspective, could be addressed through things like subs ponds and design of buildings so that they're efficient in terms of rainwater collection and harvesting.
Okay, thank you. Kenny.
Thanks, Convener. So, well, hats off, Dan. I mean, the amount of work and detail, and I hope it's enough to pass the gate check. Just leading on from Hannah's point, and as somebody that goes to 7 community council meetings and sits there when they say, what are we meant to do with this, as the blue, green, yellow, pink, comes forward. And the reality is nothing, actually, but part of the process seems to be that we flood these groups. And if you heard Dalwhinnie this morning at the planning meeting, doing huge amounts of work voluntarily to build up projects, and then they're faced with these massively complex pieces of information. And the ultimate implication is it's this whole fatigue thing. This is not a criticism of what you've achieved here, but it reflects on Hannah's comment. And I think there is a danger that it's another CNPA thing you've meant to do, which we didn't do. What's the point? And I think that's a general concern. And if we are engaging, we need to be honest to say, look, this is part of a process, and the next stage will be much more engaging. Or I don't know how we do it, but we need to be aware of public perception, particularly people who are active and busy in communities, leading for communities, have been faced with this sort of stuff, for want of a better expression, is pretty tough. And we want them on side, obviously, and I do what I can in my little way when I go there. But it's quite difficult. I think we should note that.
Yeah, consultation fatigue is a difficult one, and one of the ways we've tried to reduce that is by feeding into consultations or consultation events that are already ongoing. So the community action planning is a good example of that. But yes, I do have sympathies with community councils around the whole process.
I think Kenny makes a good point, because it's the next step that we really need the consultation from the communities. And if we pave them off at the gate check stage, then our job's going to be even more difficult to get them to fully engage when we go with maps and interesting stuff to them. Bill, you wanted to come in on that point?
No, it's not actually that point. And I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but it's about housing. There are 442 current applications for housing in Badenich and Strathspey alone. So how we get to a current requirement of 52 throughout the entire park is just mystifying me. Now, I appreciate not all of those 442 will be homeless, etc. But they are on the housing register. There are 442 individuals or families on the housing register. So I
don't think we've bottomed out that 50 figure yet, because we're speaking about 800, aren't we? 889 houses. But Bill's picking up on this 50 figure.
Yeah, so I mean, Bill's picking up that as a part of that 850 calculation that went into the minimum that Scottish Government set out. But that's not the key piece of information that we're taking to determine what our housing land requirement should be. Where that comes into play is that we need to be over 850, because if we're under, we will be found insufficient. So we are that. So we have taken the latest information we can from the housing need and demand assessments that have been undertaken, and are of more detail than what has gone into that calculation for the minimum. And so our housing land requirement is 889, and that does include a generous level of generosity, as it's called. So that's 30%, which is built in. So that's how we get to that point. So we will need to identify land for just to be clear, we will need to identify land for at least 889, according to that figure. Some of that, I will say, may come from existing sites that haven't been developed, but that's a matter that we would need to go through an assessment process to determine how much.
Just on 2 points. One on the amount of consultation. I suppose 2 bits to that. One is that the level of consultation we've had to do is basically set out in the Planning Act, so we've had no option in terms of some of those things. And there's no doubt that the next part of the park plan, or the local development plan, is the part that communities will be most interested in when land starts to get talked about, or where certain things are happening in certain places. So I think that's where we definitely need people to come in to that. But we did set out our concerns around the amount of consultation to Scottish Government as part of a letter that we put in last year, which is exactly around those issues, which is it's not just about volume of consultation. We've got to be consulting on the right things. And the right things, I think, probably come at the next stage. So I mean, the team have done a great job to get all the information together and do the consultation they have. I think the bit where communities will be most interested is when you can start to establish what it is that's happening within those places. And then on the housing point, just to say, I suppose that's the whole point of the next stage with the proposed plan development, is to have those conversations about what level of housing and what land we want to see allocated where to deliver what we want in the Cairngorms, and how that fits with what we're trying to do through the different policies that were set out in the last National Park Partnership Plan, and obviously how that tallies in with the new National Park Partnership Plan as well. So there's still a long way to go, I suppose, from the evidence report stage to when we'll actually have a plan that sets out where we want to see the land allocated and how that interacts with all the other policies on housing, because this is one part, which is the land. The other bit is the finance, the stuff that Russell was talking about in terms of changes to council tax and things like that will also have an impact. So we've got to try and pull that all together, and I think that will be no doubt quite a debate within the board as well about how we do all that over the next 18 months or so.
Thanks. Paul and then Lauren.
Thank you. Yeah, extensive piece of work and well done. I have a question and a for example. And the question is, so I know we're not developing policy right now, but if something is not in the evidence report, does that mean that if when we come to set policy, that particular theme might not be included in the policies? And I'll give you the for example. So I was at Annex 1.19, which is the flood risk and management annex. I was looking at that, and it has a significant emphasis when you're looking to intervene in terms of how it would impact on the environment. And then when you're doing the work, it talks about how the work must be done, again, with being conscious of the environment, so salmon fishing seasons, etc. But it doesn't talk enough about, or as much as I would hope, about people. And so this morning's application, where we had the ponds on the Ballater side, we would like, when we come to the policy stage, the hypothetical is, could we emphasize more that any intervention that is made, and it's to retain or reduce the amount of flow in the Dee, that we could say that it had to take into account the urban and other houses and the impact on them and their needs, even though it's not mentioned here in the evidence report. So the policy might be that anything that comes before us by way of the application this morning should try to reduce the flow of water such that it reduces the impact of flooding on Ballater, for example.
So in terms of that, I don't think that would be precluded as a approach we could take in the proposed plan, because you could package that up as part of the overall need to build resilience. So I'm going to say I don't think that is missing necessarily, but we'd have to explore what what does that mean? What would and what would it look like if it were to go in? But I mean, I think that is certainly, along with a load of other stuff related to policy, is a discussion that we can have as a board as we prepare the proposed plan.
Yeah.
So can I take it from that then that if something as specific as that is not in the evidence report, it doesn't prevent us from shaping it in policy?
Depends. So because what your example, I think, could, it can be packaged in that sense, but if it's something that we haven't taken account of at all, then no, basically, because this is the basis to which we prepare the proposed plan and the basis to which that proposed plan will be examined by a reporter when it gets to its public examination.
Thank you.
I would say that some of the implications are designed to enable a degree of flexibility in what we are able to do in the proposed plan.
Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And well done, team. What a massive piece of work, just to echo that one more time. This is huge. I'm kind of maybe kind of down a similar path as Paul. I'm not sure if this is the kind of right time, but it's something that's been sitting at the back of my head a lot when reading, especially about land use. But I guess my question is more around when we're changing land use at scale for carbon markets, or what's the word, kind of capital investment, when does that kind of trigger about how we can kind of shape around community benefit? I'm kind of working this out in my head, so the question's in here somewhere, so hang on with me. But I think it's around, is there something in planning that we can put in place so that when we're doing large scale, or there's large scale land acquisitions for carbon markets, that it aligns with, I don't know, supporting sustainable community development and payback for communities. This is maybe not the time for it, but I wanted to kind of raise it as something that could be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, I mean, unless it requires planning permission, it wouldn't be something that we would consider through the LDP. I think what you're describing there is probably something as a discussion for the National Park Partnership Plan, but I'd defer to Grant on that.
Yeah, I suppose there's the National Park Partnership Plan part to that, which is what's our approach to that. I suppose the other part is the work that we're doing through Cairns 2030, which is working with the states on community benefits from land use. I mean, that's all happening at the moment. But I mean, the point Dan makes, which is it's only if it falls within the planning system that there would be anything particularly around that. There are certain bits that can fall within the planning system. There's obviously quite a lot that doesn't. So I doubt that this is the key mechanism for dealing with those issues, would be my honest answer to that. It might have a marginal part to play, but it's probably not the key place in that.
Okay, thanks. Anne, and then Duncan.
Thank you. I've been looking at the transport strategy, I'm going to call it that, the prioritising sustainable transport. And I appreciate that this comes from Scotland's National Transport Strategy. However, right at the bottom of it, and it says that basically private cars are I'm going to call it, because it's like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs turned on its head, the diagram. To me, I'm sorry, but in rural Scotland, everybody relies on a private car. And I understand the walking and wheeling and cycling debate. I get that. But I also am very, very conscious in our rural communities, public transport, especially this side of the hill, does not exist. It's all right talking about public transport in urban and situations, and in our bigger, larger communities, for example, Ballater, linking up our major communities. But in the real world, which is where I am, and when I, for example, if I wanted to, if I go to attend a community council meeting in a rural area, I have to rely on a private car. So I find this I appreciate it's national policy. I appreciate what we're doing, but I find it quite discriminatory and not actually in the real world. The real world is, despite the ambition and the aspirations, that is not the way things are at the moment. Or even maybe in 10 years' time, unless every single village and hamlet in Scotland is going to be linked by public transport. And I think we have to be realistic.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that is recognised. Obviously, we need to, when we're creating this document, we need to demonstrate how we are considering national guidance and national policy, because it applies to us all. But that doesn't mean that we can't consider the actual rural characteristics of the area we exist in and acknowledge that there are issues, and that, as you say, there's going to be a reliance on private motor vehicles for most of the population. In terms of the LDP, really, where you're getting down to like the implications, it's about the spatial strategy and how that influences the where you concentrate development. So, for example, there will be less need to travel if there is housing. For people who live in Grantown, for example, they will need to rely on their car, for example, less often than someone who lives in the countryside. It's just those kinds of principles.
If I can come back, please, is it then more focused on the larger urban conurbations than the rural areas?
What do you mean by that? Sorry, is what more focused?
The transport policy and what we're putting into into this.
Well, the spatial strategy is already set out in the National Park Partnership Plan. So the strategic settlements are Aviemore, Grantown-on-Spey, Newton Moor, Kingussie and Ballater. And those areas, because of their status within that hierarchy and within that spatial strategy, will be the focus for more development than other places. But that doesn't mean there won't be development in other places. It just won't be at the same scale.
Thank you.
Duncan.
Yeah, well done, Dan, and all your team. It is a hell of a lot of work going into this. I was looking at the living locally in 20-minute neighbourhoods, but I was just wondering how much are the community action plans referred to, as when I was going through them, the kind of key theme majority of what the towns and villages action plans were coming out with was, wanting economically thriving communities, i.e. creating new units, business spaces and things that people, tangible things that people can see that are going to improve how they live their lives in these places. So I was just wondering how much that's referred to and how much more or how that information will be gathered from those communities.
Yeah, no problem. So in terms of the community action plans, what we've done is as well as being involved in the development and refreshing of the new ones, we've done a analysis of every single one in relation to every single schedule and the evidence within that to pull out those key actions relating to those things. So the purpose of that is that when we get to preparing the proposed plan and we start creating this place-based information with maps and setting out where the allocated sites are and anything else that is relevant to go on those maps, we can then bring in those priorities that communities have identified, at least those related to the planning process, and highlight those within those kind of place-based bits of information. And that may be, as I say, in a sense of a series of priorities or actions, or it might be spatial as well, because there are community action plans who have identified, you know, a need for a site for something, you know. So that's how we intend to use that information. And also bearing in mind, this is not the last time we're going to do any kind of that direct engagement. Once we have that place-based information, we'll go back out to communities and discuss it with them and basically get their views on it at that point before we even get to the point of consultation on the proposed plan. So that can all be fed into that process.
Dan, on that point then, is there a gap? Because what I've written down in my observation is there's no community plans for Murray, this is Tomintoul and Glenlivet, or Angus, as far as I think I'm correct in saying that. And I just wondered, is there a gap there, and should we, if we don't need it for the evidence report, have we got something in place to go out to that missing communities to bring them on board? I know it's a community, a bottom-up thing, but maybe they just need a bit of help.
Yeah, so in terms of, you know, in terms of the areas that have community action plans, we've obviously already got like quite a bit of information we can feed into this placemaking aspect. But so in terms of like that places like those in Murray which don't have them, we will still undergo the same process. We'll go out to see those communities with the place-based information we have been able to put together from the information that we do have, and then they can contribute in that way. Even, you know, it would have been nice to have like community action plans there so we could have a little bit more to take, but we can still gather that and we can still do that engagement at the proposed plan stage. And I think it would probably be more out because we don't have a community action plan or community action plan process ongoing. I think there would have been little point doing that at the evidence report stage where you can't really take anything like concrete to them. So undertaking that at the proposed plan stage is the intention. I think that will get the best outcome.
Derek.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's really an answer to your own one. It's difficult to have community action plans when there aren't community councils, and Tomintoul and Glenlivet is I think the only area of the park that doesn't have a community council. Should we be encouraging these areas to form community councils so that there can be more consultation?
Thanks, Derek. Well, we have tried to get the communities to do community action plans in the Tomintoul and Glenlivet area, and obviously we do treat CATCA in the same way as we treat a community council. So the community associations are treated in the same way. But community action plans aren't necessarily led by a community council. There may be other parts of the community doing that, and it just has proved a bit more difficult in that area to do it or to review it because it's due a review. So I think they're not statutory required things for any party. They're something that we encourage and we've supported, but we can't force people to do it.
Thank you. Any more? Yeah, Jackie.
Thanks, Eleanor. So, based on this huge amount of work, and it's based on a framework really that you've been given by Scottish Government, it's ended up as quite a siloed approach. So we've got all the analysis on each of these areas, and in reality, there needs to be a lot of cross-cutting and a more holistic approach to a lot of the issues, which I think you've succeeded in pulling in these. But when we come to do the actual plan, that's going to be really important. I'm thinking specifically or particularly around economic development, for example, where economic development cross-cuts with most of the issues that you've pulled out. But I did see a table where economic development was only ticked against the sort of obvious bits. So it was just, I suppose, making a point that that cross-cutting approach, cross-fertilisation, making sure that we're taking advantage. So if you take economic development, that there'll be opportunities across a lot of these areas, including a lot of the environmental, nature restoration work, etc., where the economic impact sometimes we don't measure as well as we could do, is taken a note of. So I'm not saying it's something that I'm not suggesting that affects what's in the report, but it's just for future use that we make sure that we're taking full advantage of both the opportunities and the challenges of cross-fertilising all the different across the different issues and areas.
Thank you very much. Fully agree.
Has everybody spoken that wants to speak? Yeah. Okay, on that basis then, can we look at the recommendations and what we're being asked to do today? And that's to, first of all, approve the evidence report for submission to Scottish ministers for its gate check review via the Scottish Government GPEA. Members agreed to do that? Thank you. And B, to delegate authority to the Head of Planning and Chief Planning Officer to respond to any requests for further information or amendment as a result of the gate check process. Agreed? Okay. Dan, can I just, on behalf of the board, give you our thanks for all the work that you and your team have done to get us to this stage. It's a tremendous amount, just paper involved, let alone all the work and days and hours that you've spent on it. So thank you very much. Okay. And that, guys, unless there's any AOCB, which I haven't been notified of any. John?
I was looking for somebody to cover performance on Monday because I've got to take somebody to Glasgow to the hospital, but I think Russell was going to check.
I forgot.
I forgot, just well reminded you.
I'll leave you guys to sort that out between you. The next meeting then is the 27th of March here in Granton. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Audit and risk next, Fiona, at 2 o'clock.
Lunch.